Returning home, Emma and her son, Sam, uncover a betrayal that shatters their world. Her husband, discovering Emma's inheritance is just an old shack, brings his mistress home and kicks them out. Listen to the full story, what happens. Welcome to Narrative Nest, where heartwarming tales, thrilling revenge stories, and gripping betrayals await. Each story touches your heart and ignites your imagination. Subscribe now, and let's get into the story. Emma and her son, Sam, trudged up the steps to their cozy home, arms laden with grocery bags. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow on the sidewalk. Emma juggled her keys, fumbling to find the right one. Sam, ever impatient, grabbed the door handle and twisted, expecting it to be locked as usual. Surprisingly, the door swung open. Emma paused, her brows knitting together in confusion. "That's odd," she muttered to herself. "Mark must have come home early today." After they placed the groceries on the kitchen counter, Emma decided she deserved a few moments to unwind in the living room before starting dinner. However, as she stepped into the room, her steps faltered. There on the sofa sat her husband, Mark, but he wasn't alone. Beside him was a woman Emma had never seen before, their quiet giggles filling the room. Emma's heart skipped a beat, her mind racing. "Excuse me," she managed to say, her voice steady despite the shock. "What the heck is going on here?" The mysterious woman looked up, a smile playing on her lips, barely concealing a laugh, but there was a smugness to it that Emma didn't like. Mark, however, remained seated, his expression unreadable. A storm of emotions raged inside Emma. Her heart pounded fiercely, a sensation she hadn't felt before. She stood there, waiting for an explanation, hoping against hope this was some bizarre prank. Time seemed to stretch on forever as she waited for Mark to react. Finally, he stood, his face serious, meeting Emma's eyes squarely. The look on his face confirmed her fears. This was no joke. Emma stood frozen, her eyes locked on Mark as he introduced the woman sitting next to him with a casualness that stung her deeply. "Emma, this is my girlfriend, Lauren." "Lauren, this is my soon-to-be ex-wife," Emma, Mark said, his voice devoid of any emotion. Emma's mind reeled, unable to grasp the full scope of what was happening. "Wait, I don't get it. So you're telling me you brought your girlfriend to our house," she began, her voice trembling with disbelief and hurt. Mark interrupted sharply. "My house, Emma. It's my house. And look, I've tried working it out, and clearly it failed." "I'm sorry, but we have to move on," he declared, his smile forced and empty. The words hit Emma like a physical blow. Her heart raced painfully, the shock of his betrayal feeling as devastating as losing a beloved family member. She struggled to understand how everything had changed so quickly. Just yesterday, they were laughing together, sharing moments of joy. Confusion clouded her thoughts. "How long has this been going on?" she managed to ask, her voice a mix of anger and sorrow. Mark sighed heavily, his expression turning sour as he faced Emma's questioning. "It's been happening on the side," he admitted reluctantly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Emma pressed, needing answers, her voice rising with each word. Mark's irritation grew visible. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not liking the direction of the conversation. "Emma, this isn't the time or place to discuss this," he said dismissively, trying to end the conversation. Emma tried to speak, her voice wavering with emotion. "Who is she, and how can you just stand there unaffected?" she asked, her eyes darting between Mark and the woman beside him. Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but before she could get a word out, Mark intervened. He turned towards Lauren, his hands tightening on her waist as he faced Emma squarely. His voice was icy, each word deliberate and cutting. "Emma, you had your chance. You didn't meet my expectations," he stated bluntly. "Lauren can provide what I need." The harshness of his words was like a slap to Emma's face, leaving her reeling from the cold dismissal of the time they had been together. "I don't understand, Mark. After all these years together, how can you say this?" "What am I supposed to tell Sam?" she asked, her voice quivering on the verge of tears. Mark's response was cold and dismissive. "Tell him whatever you think is best." "I'm not his father, Emma." "What kind of question is that?" he snapped, his anger rising. "Mark, is this really you talking? Can you hear what you're saying?" Emma pleaded, tears already spilling down her cheeks. Mark closed his eyes, a gesture of annoyance. "Oh, come on, Emma. Are you trying to make me feel guilty about Sam now? He's not my blood. He was never going to be my son. How can you be so naive? He retorted harshly. Emma stood there, sobbing quietly, her head in despair. I have no interest in your life anymore. Do me a favor, will you? Mark paused, glancing past Emma. Unseen by them, until now, 7-year-old Sam had overheard everything. As Emma turned, she saw her son peeking around the corner, his attempt to smile doing little to mask the tears brimming in his eyes. Baby Emma's voice broke as he walked into her arms. I'm so sorry, baby. Mark cleared his throat loudly, interrupting the tender moment. Sorry to cut into your emotional moment, but you need to pack your bags now. Emma looked up at Mark through her tears, stunned. What do you mean, Mark? We have nowhere else to go. Can't you give us some time? She implored, her embrace tightening around her son. This is over, Emma. If you put in some effort, perhaps you could find a place to go. Like that old shack you've inherited, Mark said. Emma gasped softly, taking a step back as the gears in her head began to work their way. It became clearer at that point what the man before her was all about. Without a word said, she turned on her heels, holding her son's hand as she made her way to the bedroom that they shared. Go gather your things, Sam. Where would we go? Mum Sam asked with a smile, but his eyes were in tears. Emma swallowed, looking away from the boy staring innocently at her. We will be fine, baby. Just go get your things. As soon as she heard the soft click of the door, she crumbled to the ground. It all looked like a nightmare that she couldn't even wake up from. She lay there sobbing, remembering how it all started. It was hard for her to even remarry after the death of her first husband. No man seemed to come near to treating her right until Mark came along. It was a warm summer evening, and she was attending a mutual friend's birthday party. She was initially hesitant to go because of Sam, but her friend's persistent nudging finally won her over. He was the first person she spotted as she walked into the garden. He was tall, dark-haired, and had piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through her, as if he knew she was watching him. He walked up to her with a smile on his face. Mark was charming and witty, making her laugh with ease for the first time in a year and a half. She remembered the way her heart skipped a beat when he took her hand, the way his smile made her feel like she was home to him. They danced under the stars that evening, swaying gently to the music as their eyes were locked on each other. It was as if time stood still, and all that mattered was the two of them. As the night drew to a close, he walked her over to her car, having exchanged numbers. He later asked her on a proper date. She remembered feeling like she was walking on air. However, that didn't last for long as she realized that she never told him about her son. After 2 dates, she garnered the courage and told him everything about herself, including her son and her inheritance. Looking back now, she knew that she should have been more careful when he was quick to dismiss those things, saying that he only loved her. She brushed off everything that was glaring, trying to convince herself that the love that they shared was wonderful until the day that they went to check the house that she inherited from her father. She couldn't help but remember how disgusted he looked when they got there. It wasn't what they both expected at all, but he looked more heartbroken and annoyed at the same time. It was the same man that was so caring and kind to her that now held a woman in his hands. Their laughter made its way up to their room, breaking her heart more. Never would she have thought that all her now ex-husband wanted was her inheritance. Everything he did was just a complete lie. How did I not realize this before? She whimpered, trying to get to her feet. She couldn't take all that was happening anymore, so she needed to do what was asked of her. Emma's memories turned to bitter resentment as she stormed into her bedroom, yanking open the closet door with a force that sent hangers clattering to the floor. She began to toss clothes into a suitcase angrily. She couldn't believe she had wasted years on Mark's lies and deceit. As she packed, her head raced with all the signs she had ignored. All the time she had made excuses for his behavior. Her anger and hurt boiled over, manifesting in the fierce way she crammed clothes into the bag, as if trying to squeeze out all the pain and betrayal. Just as she was about to zip the suitcase shut, a small voice interrupted her tumultuous thoughts. Mum Sam's hesitant tone broke through her fury, and she turned to see her son standing in the doorway, his backpack slung over his shoulder and another suitcase just by him. It's all right, baby. I'm all ready. She closed her suitcase shut, moving it towards the door. They made it out of the house, and it took all of her willpower not to look back. Emma pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the home that she and Sam had spent 4 years in. The silence in the car continued to increase, punctuated only by Sam's occasional sniffle. Her heart ached, knowing that her son was hurting as much as she was, and she couldn't do anything to make it go away. Are we never coming back home?" Sam asked finally, trembling slightly. Emma took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "Mark and I are having some problems, buddy. We need to get away for a bit." She paused, collecting her thoughts. He wasn't being honest with us, Sam. He was hurting us both, and it was best for us to leave. Is it because of her? His eyes narrowed as he looked at her through the mirror. She noticed that his face was already pale as her heart skipped a beat. "Yes, sweetie, it is," she whispered softly. "But we'll get through together, okay? We'll make a better life, just the two of us." As they drove through the streets, she began to point out to the other houses in the new area that they were moving to, all in a bid to get her son to speak again. "Do you remember the place that I told you that your grandfather left us?" Sam merely nodded, looking out the window. "That's where we will be staying. It's going to be fun." Not so long after that, the house that Mark referred to as an old shack came into view. Emma knew that it wasn't much, but it was a very good place to start over, a place to heal. She pulled into the driveway, turning off the engine. "We're here, buddy." She stamped a smile on her face. "Let's go inside and take care of the place. What do you think?" "I've ordered chicken and chips too." It was then Sam looked her straight in the eye, as if scrutinizing her and her emotions. "My favorite," he merely said as he made his way out of the car, walking up the steps. Emma knew that her son wanted to say more but decided not to. He was so much like his father in many ways, and for the first time that day she was grateful that Sam wasn't Mark's biological son. Emma walked into the house alongside Sam, who was gazing around at the spacious interior. The house was bigger than it had seemed from the outside, with high ceilings and large windows that let in plenty of light. But it was clear that Mark had been wrong about calling it a shack. Despite it being a mess, with dust and cobwebs covering every surface, it was still a strong house. "Well, buddy, it looks like we've got our work cut out for us," Emma sighed, rolling up her sleeves. Sam nodded, still looking around. "Let me check the attic for what we would use. There should be a vacuum cleaner somewhere." "Just be careful, buddy," she called out, watching him make his way up to the attic. He emerged back into the living room less than 5 minutes later. Together, they began to clean the house from top to bottom. They dusted and vacuumed, scrubbed the floors, and wiped down the counters. Emma showed Sam how to use a mop and how to clean the windows until they sparkled. As they worked, the house began to transform. The dust and dirt disappeared, revealing the real beauty of the house. The hardwood floors that were once so dusty shone brightly, just as the windows sparkled. It all changed the overall look of the house. Emma and Sam continued to work tirelessly, taking breaks only to eat and rest. But as the hours passed, their hard work paid off. The house began to feel like home, little by little. As they finished up the last of the cleaning, Emma turned to her son with a smile. "You know, kiddo, I think we make a pretty good team." Just as Sam was about to reply, she saw the twitch in his eyes and the way his hands trembled. The sitting room, though sparkling clean, was devoid of any form of warmth. Emma's eyes scanned the room, landing on the old stove in the corner. She remembered seeing some discarded wood planks in the backyard and decided to try and use them for firewood. But as she struggled to break them into smaller pieces, she realized it wasn't going to be easy. "Why don't we go see if we can get an axe from our neighbors?" She held her hands tightly, trying to keep herself warm, like her son was also trying to do. "What if we aren't welcome?" Sam asked, the very question on her mind. She smiled, holding him by the hand, and strode out of the house. They made their way to the neighbor's house, hoping against hope that they might have an axe or something she could use. The house just next to them seemed to be just as quiet as theirs before they came in. Emma really hoped that the people here would be kind-hearted to help them out. Sam had seen enough heart-wrenching things just in a day. She wasn't ready for that to still continue. They stood before the door of the big house, painted in a beautiful shade of ash. Sucking up courage, she finally knocked on the door, awaiting someone to respond. But seconds flew by, and no one answered. Sam shared a glance with his mother before knocking again, a bit louder this time. However, nothing changed at all. Emma was about to knock again when the door slowly creaked open, revealing an old woman. "Can I help you, dear?" the woman asked, her eyes first on Emma before her gaze settled on Sam. The woman smiled warmly, waiting for the lady before her to give her a reply. "I'm sorry for disturbing you at this time. We just moved to this house, and we are in dire need of an axe." The woman slowly shook her head. "I don't have any, but come in. Don't stand out here in the cold, you'd freeze to death. The woman stepped aside, revealing a cozy living room behind her. Emma hesitated, not feeling so comfortable about just entering a stranger's house, but Sam's shivering beside her made her think again. She couldn't just let him suffer in the cold. Even if she could take it, he couldn't. With a quiet nod, she held Sam's hand and entered the woman's house. The warmth that greeted them as soon as they walked in was all they needed at that point. A fire crackled at the fireplace, giving a soft glow in that area. Emma's gaze finally landed on the woman, taking in the way she looked. The woman was clearly as old as her dead mother would have been, but she still looked more beautiful, like a well-worn book that grew precious with time. Overall, her frame was sturdier than anyone she had seen her age. The house was just as beautiful as the woman. The walls were decorated with hand-drawn characters that Emma suspected to be drawn by a little child. Taking a quick sniff, she could swear that the woman was baking something. Emma felt a pang of envy, wishing her home could be as welcoming. As they settled by the fire, the woman handed them cups. Hers was filled with steaming tea and Sam's with hot chocolate, his favorite. "I'm Martha. I didn't get your name earlier." Emma gasped, a bit embarrassed. "Forgive my manners. I'm Emma, and this is my son, Sam." She took a glance at her son, who was busy with his hot chocolate. "Ah, you must be quite cautious, Emma." "Don't worry, I don't bite." Emma's cheeks flushed, but she didn't deny it. Martha leaned forward. "Tell me, what brings you to this old house?" "I thought it was abandoned after no one came to check on it." Her gaze dropped as she sipped the tea. "It wasn't abandoned." She said nothing more, even though she perceived that Martha wanted to hear more. "Ah, I see. Well, it's clear you're not just passing through. You're staying, at least for a little while." Emma nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She was beginning to think that Martha would press on with the questions. However, there was something about Martha that put her at ease, despite her initial reservations. Her mind wandered to the scenes that happened earlier that day, and she couldn't help but wonder what Mark was doing now. What she was sure about, though, was that he wasn't in the same situation as they were. He was probably in bed with the new chick he used to replace her. She couldn't help the sad smile that formed on her face. It was far better than crying again. She didn't notice Martha's attempts to get her attention, too caught up in her own thoughts. It wasn't until Martha's gentle touch on her arm that she snapped back to reality. "Emma, dear, I was calling your name." Martha smiled softly. "I have spare rooms upstairs, and you're both welcome to stay the night. In the morning I'll call someone to come and do the repairs on your house." Emma's instincts kicked in, and she shook her head. "No, Martha, you've done enough already. We can't impose on you like that." "Nonsense, child. You're not imposing. I want to help. And besides, it's not safe for you to go back to that cold, dark house tonight." Emma hesitated, surprised at the offer that Martha threw to her, but she didn't want to be a burden. "Really, Martha, we'll be fine. We can." Martha's hand on her arm stopped her. "Emma, listen to me. You're not going back to that house tonight. You're going to stay here, where it's warm and safe, and in the morning we'll get your house fixed up, and you can go back to your life. But for now, just accept my help, okay?" Emma's resistance crumbled under her persistence, seeing that Martha wasn't about to allow no for an answer. "Okay, thank you, Martha." Emma bundled up and headed back to her house, surprised by how cold it was suddenly. She quickly gathered some essentials: clothes, toiletries, and Sam's blanket, and returned to Martha's house. As she entered, she spotted Sam fast asleep on the couch, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. Martha smiled and nodded towards the stairs. "Let me show you the rooms." Emma followed, carrying Sam as her eyes adjusted to the dimness of the upstairs hallway. The same decorations on the living room walls were taken a step further in the hallway. This time, it looked more mature. Martha showed her 2 rooms just by each other. She quickly placed Sam, who mumbled something in his sleep, on the bed, putting his blanket over him. But as she gazed at her son on the bed, she felt uneasy. She didn't want to sleep alone tonight, given how the day went for her. As if sensing her hesitation, Martha lingered by the door. "You know, Emma, you're welcome to share a room with Sam if you'd like. I know how it can be with mothers and their children." Emma's eyes met Martha's, wondering if she was so easy to read, or if Martha just had that sixth sense. "Thank you, Martha. I think I'll do that." It was a few hours before Emma was finally able to get some sleep, and before she finally let go of reality, tears dropped from her eyes both in gratitude and shock. At least in all that happened, she didn't lose entirely. The next day, Emma stood in the cold and poorly lit room, watching as Martha's son, David, examined the ancient furnace. His rugged features seemed chiseled from granite, his jawline sharp and unyielding. His eyes, she noticed, were mostly a deep shade of blue, concentrating on the metal beast before him. Initially, she mistook him for the handyman until Martha introduced him as her son and the person who would handle her repairs. Martha also mentioned something about him being a firefighter. The furnace was a hulking mass of dust and decay because it had been dormant for a very long while. There were cobwebs all around it alongside a thick layer of dust. Emma wondered how it had managed to function at all. This thing's a relic. I'm surprised it didn't blow the whole house to kingdom come. Thank heavens that my mother had no axe, David said. Emma, who was standing by his side, felt defensive all of a sudden. Hey, it's not that bad. It just needs a little TLC. TLC. This thing needs a miracle or a wrecking ball, he grunted, shaking his head. Well, it's not like I had a choice. It came with the house. David snorted, causing her to want to shout in frustration. Yeah, well, the previous owner probably wanted to get rid of it, along with the rest of this dump. Hey, this house has character, and it's not a dump. Her eyes bored deep into the back of his head. If looks could kill, he would have been gone a long time ago. Character? You mean like the leaky roof and the creaky floors? Yeah, real charming. Martha cleared her throat loudly, interrupting the duo. David dear, that's enough. Emma, why don't you go help me with some lunch? Sam will be home soon, and you haven't gotten groceries yet. Without another word, Emma calmed herself down, knowing it was too childish of her to throw a tantrum. But just as she stepped out of the house, she could swear that he muttered something annoying about her. How could she have known that the person that Martha said would help her out was the woman's 35-year-old son? He was just 5 years older than her, yet he seemed much bigger and ridiculously handsome. He was quite annoying, all right. It wasn't worth her time, though. Martha was already doing her more than a favor by allowing her to stay, having a roof over her head and that of her son. If not for Martha, she couldn't imagine how she would have prepped herself to wake up Sam and get him ready for school in a house that needed multiple repairs. Sam was becoming a big boy. Little by little, he told her this morning, with his chin raised high, that he could take care of himself in the bathroom. 3 years ago, he was the one who would cry, waiting for her to do that. Emma entered the warm kitchen, allowing the aroma of freshly baked bread to envelop her. Martha stood at the counter, putting some spice into what Emma knew was stew. She joined her immediately, wanting to be of use for once. I grew up an only child, Martha started to say as she turned to the window side where she could comfortably see Emma's house from. My parents were older, and they lavished all their love and attention on me, but sometimes I felt so lonely. I longed for a sibling to share my secrets with, to play with, to fight with. Emma's hands paused, wondering what prompted Martha to start talking about her childhood out of the blue. But then I met my husband, and he became my everything. We had David, and our little family was complete. Or so we thought. We wanted more children, but life had other plans. My husband passed away, and I was left alone with only David to care for. It broke my heart, Emma, to think that I'd never get to experience the joy of motherhood again. Emma could relate a bit to what Martha was saying. I'm so sorry about that. Oh, it's nothing. It's just that seeing the way you and David acted earlier, it made me imagine what the house would have been like if I had another child. Just as she was about to speak, the kitchen door burst open, and Sam strode in, his backpack slung over his shoulder, with an excited grin on his face. Hey, Mum, guess what? We did a science experiment today, and it was so cool. We made a volcano erupt, and then in gym class I scored a goal. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, I got an A on my math test. Martha's face lit up immediately, and she enveloped Sam in a hug. That's amazing, sweetie. I'm so proud of you. David walked into the kitchen at that point, his nose twitching from sniffing the air. He let out a sigh before his eyes landed on the boy, whose eyes were fixed on him. A small smile played on his lips as he approached him. Hey, little man. Sam's eyes widened slowly as he took in David's imposing figure. Whoa, you are huge. Yeah, I get that a lot, David chuckled, shrugging at his statement. Emma moved closer to her son, holding him by the shoulders. Sam, that's not a polite thing to say. Apologize to David. Sam's face flushed, and he looked down at his feet. Sorry, David. No worries, little man. I'm used to it. Emma smiled, her eyes meeting David's in a brief moment of understanding. Well, let's get some lunch, shall we? Sam, why don't you go wash your hands and we'll get started? As Sam scampered off, Emma turned to David, apologetic. Sorry about that. He can be a bit enthusiastic sometimes. Like I said, I'm used to it. Kids are always curious about the big, scary firefighter. Emma merely smiled, seeing him in another light. The next few weeks were as fast as one would see lightning in the sky. She did her best to keep herself busy when Sam wasn't around her. Martha had also kept her company on multiple occasions. One of those days, she broke down in tears, remembering what her ex-husband did to her. But Martha simply held her, not asking questions. The words were on the tip of her mouth, about to spill to Martha that her cheating ex-husband had just served her divorce papers. Those words were never spilled, and Martha didn't ask about it even days after. She grabbed the dishes that she had borrowed from Martha and headed out the door, making a mental note to also buy new cookware for the kitchen. Sam would be back soon, so she needed to do this as fast as she could. Just as she locked the door and turned, she noticed an exotic car pull up at Martha's gate. A young girl, looking younger than Sam, hopped out of the car and eagerly waved goodbye to the driver before skipping into the house. Emma was more curious when David appeared out of nowhere, standing by the gate, as if waiting for the driver to notice him. It was then that a stunning woman with long, dark, silky hair made her way out of the car, looking a bit flushed. David and the woman began to speak to each other in low tones. From the creases on David's forehead, she suspected that they were having an argument. But she was too far away to make out what they were saying. Not that it was any of her business, the man did his best to annoy her each time he saw her. Feeling like an intruder, she hesitated, unsure whether to stay back and return the dishes later or go on. Just then, the woman stormed off, leaving David standing alone by the gate, his eyes still fixed on the car as it drove away. David put his hands through his hair in frustration as he turned to go back into the house. His eyes met with hers immediately before he finally nodded and went into the house. Emma didn't need anyone to tell her to postpone giving Martha the dishes until next time. She wondered why David's eyes flashed anger at her. It felt more raw than anger itself. 2 days later, Emma couldn't avoid going to Martha's place anymore. Sam had come bearing questions from Martha, who he now saw as his own grandmother. She knocked twice before the door opened, and the little girl she saw earlier that week stood before her, smiling. "Hi, I'm Lily." Emma couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. It was then she saw that Martha was behind Lily. "I haven't seen you in a while. This is Lily, David's daughter." Her smile froze as she processed the introduction Martha just gave. David's daughter? She hadn't expected that. That explained the uncanny resemblance between David and his daughter. She had thought him to be mostly gruff and annoying, but now realizing that he had a child made her think him to be a softie. David's daughter, she blurted out as she stepped into the house, walking to the kitchen to place the dishes there. "That's right, my dear." Emma turned to see David standing in the doorway, looking at her amusingly. He was leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. "Wow, I didn't know you were a father." She looked away from his gaze. David raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises." "Surprises? My foot," she muttered to herself, walking up to him. "You are so gruff and intimidating, believe it or not. Now, can you excuse me?" He put his hand over the doorpost, blocking her way. "Gruff and intimidating. That's not exactly the kind of language I'd use to describe myself." "Well, you have to admit, you can be a bit scary sometimes." "Scary? Me? Never." She couldn't help but laugh, putting her hand over her mouth. "Oh, come on, you're like a big, tough firefighter. I'm sure you've got a soft spot somewhere in there. Don't go getting any ideas about me being soft, got it? I'm all tough and rough around the edges." "Yeah, right. That's why you have a daughter who looks so cute and just like you. You're a total softie." David's face turned red, and he looked away, muttering under his breath. "Shut up, Emma." "What's the matter, firefighter? Can't handle a little teasing." Martha tapped her son on his arm, making him move aside. Reluctantly enough banter, you two. David, why don't you take Emma and Sam along to the park with Lily? She didn't want to be alone. He started to say something but stopped midway. I can take Sam, but I understand if you don't want to come. Emma smiled. I'll join. I just need to get him ready then. She used that opportunity to excuse herself from their midst and moved to the sitting room where Lily and Sam were drawing an object. Sorry, Lily, I have to get Sam ready for the picnic. Lily grinned wide, allowing Emma to see some of her missing teeth. You are coming, she screamed loudly, jumping to her feet. Emma, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. Holding Sam's hand, she smiled. I know. I have other things to attend to while you guys are gone. Can you come with us, please? I know we started off quite roughly, but I really want to make it up to you. David looked miserable enough for Emma to have second thoughts. She wasn't really offended earlier by his words, it was only that he was quick to dismiss her not being there, which was no problem. Are you sure you aren't doing all this because you can't handle two energetic and hyperactive kids all on your own? She put her free hand on her waist, giving him a look. David chuckled, low at first before it became louder. I'd take that as a yes. The children screamed excitedly as Emma climbed into the truck an hour later. She couldn't help but think about her ex-husband. He never would have taken the time to plan a picnic or play with the kids like David was doing. She felt a bit sick in her stomach as she thought about everything that happened. She wasn't bothered much about it anymore. Months had passed, and her son was now settled in school. Sam had really matured because he understood well what happened at the house. Earth to Emma. David snapped his fingers, breaking into her thoughts. Emma started, looking over at him. Oh, sorry, my mind was just somewhere else. She laughed awkwardly. David raised an eyebrow, giving her a glance as he drove. Everything okay? You looked a million miles away. Emma hesitated, unsure if she should share her thoughts. I'll tell you later when the kids aren't around. David nodded gingerly, like she had just told him she'd give him the world. Okay, deal. He turned on the music, and Emma's eyes widened as she recognized the opening notes of Sweet Serenade by the band Switchfoot. She couldn't help but squeal in excitement. Oh my gosh, I love this song, she exclaimed. I've seen them in concert like 5 times. I'm a total fangirl. Who would have thought? Emma grinned, feeling a little self-conscious. I used to play their CDs on repeat and dream about meeting John Foreman. I even had a Switchfoot poster on my bedroom wall. Well, I'm glad I could bring back some fond memories for you. As the music continued to play, Emma found herself feeling more and more at ease. She had totally forgotten that their children were with them as she got lost in the music. At the park, they found a nice spot under a tree, and David spread out a blanket. Emma sat down, and David joined her while the children ran off to play. They watched as Sam and Lily chased each other around, laughing and shrieking with delight. As they sat there, Emma asked David about his job as a firefighter, and he told her everything he had experienced, even up to scaring her at a point. But it was all fun. It was with him that she could finally say that she was a writer and that only one of her books had sold out. As they talked, they discovered they had more in common than they thought. Both were creative, both loved children, and both valued family above all else. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and before long they realized it was time to eat. They unpacked the food, and the children joined them, eager to dig in. They sat down together, sharing the food that Martha had packed up for them. The food in the picnic basket was more than just picnic food, it was everything. As they ate, Emma noticed the way David interacted with his daughter, the way he listened to her, and the way he made her feel special. She saw the love in his eyes, and her heart melted. She realized that this tough, gruff man was different with his daughter. As they finished their meal, David suggested a game of tag, and the children squealed with excitement. Emma joined in, laughing and running around with the others. For the first time in a long time, she could laugh without feeling sad. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they made their way back to the car, exhausted but happy. Emma turned to David and sighed dramatically. Thank you for today. I had a wonderful time. Anytime, Emma. I'm glad you enjoyed it. The children were already asleep as soon as they got into the car, exhausted from playing. David still played another of her favorite songs from the band. However, this time she stayed put, looking out the window as she thought of all the memories it brought. Her father had a hard time when she was a fangirl. He would lock her inside the room just so she could read, yet she jumped out the window, causing her father to worry all the time. Only if she could turn back the hands of time just to be in his embrace. She would cry, and he'd tell her one of his silly jokes to get on her nerves. The car suddenly stopped, causing Emma to jerk forward. "Are we home already?" David merely smiled, opening the side door and carrying Sam first. "Wait here. I'll put him in bed real quick." She watched as the tall, muscular man carried Sam gently before stretching out his hand for the key. She caught herself smiling as he went into the house, and she waited in the car. "Now, do you want to continue smiling at imaginary things?" Not wanting to wake Lily up, she came out of the car, curling her fist at him. "My imaginary character is a worldwide wrestler." They both laughed together at what she had said. She gave him a smile as she went into the house too. As she was about to go inside, he shouted something, but she couldn't make out the words. It wasn't until she had prepped for bed and put everything in place as she wanted, including a hot shower, that she realized what he said and gasped. "Don't get ahead of yourself, Emma. Maybe you didn't hear him well too," she whispered to herself, pulling the covers over her head as if that would stop the thoughts in her head. It wasn't until her eyes closed, about to surrender to sleep, that she smiled because David had told her that she looked more beautiful. The following months came with frequent picnics and birthday parties, but David didn't repeat what he had said that night, and she didn't bother to ask. It was of no use. One Thursday evening, she decided to drop by Martha's place to catch up. She knocked on the door, but there was no answer. She tried calling out, "Martha, are you there?" but only silence replied. Emma's heart began to race as she tried the door handle and found it unlocked. She pushed open the door and called, Martha hoping that no one broke into the house. She pulled out her phone and dialed Martha's number. "Martha, where are you?" "I'm at your house, and no one's here," she rapped, trying to sound calm. Martha's response was a sob. "Emma, we're at Greenwood Hospital. Lily, she's so sick. What's happening?" "How sick is she?" Martha's crying grew louder. "She needs a kidney transplant. The doctors. They say it's the only way to save her life." Emma's world stopped. She felt like she'd been punched in the gut. "I'm on my way." She immediately ran out of Martha's house to her house, instructing Sam to stay home as she rushed to her car. Her heart raced as she sped towards the hospital, Martha's sobs still replaying in her head. She burst into the hospital lobby, her eyes scanning the waiting area for Martha and David. Spotting them huddled together, she rushed over, her heels clicking on the floor. "Martha, what's happening?" Emma asked softly. Martha's tear-stained face lifted, her eyes pleading. "Emma, Lily. She needs a kidney transplant. The doctors say it's the only way to save her life." Emma's breath caught. A kidney transplant? The cost of such a surgery was astronomical. She knew that Martha and David couldn't afford it on their own. "How much time does she have?" she asked again as gears clicked in her head. "The doctors say we have only a few weeks to raise the funds." David, who had been quiet since, finally spoke. "We've already started a fundraiser, but it's not enough. We're so short on time. They are saying it's going to cost around $500,000. Emma's heart sank when she heard the numbers. The amount required was daunting, far beyond what could be realistically raised through a simple fundraiser. She knew she had to say something, anything to bolster Martha and David's spirits in this overwhelming moment. "Don't worry, we'll figure something out. I'll help you raise the funds. We'll make it happen." She held Martha's hands tight. Emma hated hospitals because of this kind of situation. In her time, there was no one to reach out to when her mother became sick. Her father did his best to gather funds, but it could do nothing to improve her health. However, Lily wasn't her mother. The girl would survive this. Her gaze strayed to David, taking a good look at him for the first time that day. He looked weary, angry, and frustrated as he was lost in thought. She placed her hand on his knee, trying to reassure him. The only big problem was how they were going to get that large amount of money in a few weeks. Emma did her best to mask her shock when they told her the exact amount, because doing that wouldn't do anyone any good. She watched as Martha began to make calls. Hours later, David paced around the room, his eyes fixed on his phone as he tried to reach his ex-wife, a model who was always busy and never seemed to have time for their daughter. She could sense his frustration growing with each failed attempt. He finally slumped into a chair, his head in his hands, and Emma knew she had to act. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "How's Lily?" David shook his head, his voice cracking. "No change. And I can't even get my ex to return my calls. She's so caught up in her own world, she doesn't even care that our daughter is fighting for her life." Emma put a hand on his arm, trying to calm him down. "We'll figure something out, David. We'll get through this together." But David just shook his head, his eyes welling up with tears. "I don't know, Emma. I just don't know." She wrapped her arms around David, holding him tightly as he let out a sob. She held him for a few moments, letting him cry out his frustration and worry. Then she gently pulled back and looked him in the eye. "I'm going to go get Sam ready for bed, but I'll be back, okay? We'll face this together." David nodded, his eyes still wet with tears, and she gave him a soft smile before standing up and heading out of the hospital room. Later that night, she tossed and turned in bed, unable to bring herself to sleep. She had rarely seen men cry in her life, so it was actually heart-wrenching when David did. In fact, she understood him better. She would do the same if she were in his shoes. She finally drifted off to sleep, but it was fitful and restless. The next morning, she woke up feeling groggy and exhausted. She went through the motions of getting Sam ready for school, but her heart wasn't in it. She was preoccupied with thoughts of how to help Martha and David. As the days passed, Emma's anxiety only grew. She visited Lily every day, but there was no improvement. The little girl lay in her hospital bed, her tiny body hooked up to machines and wires, her eyes sunken and her skin pale. David and Martha were always there, not allowing anything to go uncovered. A week went by, and Emma felt like she was in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Lily's condition remained unchanged, and the medical bills were piling up. Emma knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what, and that made her so miserable. Eventually, the next morning, Emma began to clean out the attic, trying to pass time. Dust was flying everywhere as she lifted old trunks and boxes. She coughed, waving a hand in front of her face as she reached for an old suitcase. There was more dust in the air, making her sneeze repeatedly. Setting the suitcase, she wiped her hands on her shorts and coughed as she lifted the lid of the suitcase. The faint scent of old leather wafted out. Her eyes widened as she saw carefully arranged files and an envelope addressed to her. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the handwriting to be her father's writing. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter slowly. As she scanned the letter, the paper was already yellowed with faded ink, which meant it had been there for a long while. Emma's eyes welled up with tears as she read the note from her father. She had missed him so much since he passed away. Seeing everything made her teary. "Dear Emma," the letter began in her father's familiar looping handwriting. "If you are reading this, it means you have made the wise choice to keep the house, despite its age and the memories it holds. I know it hasn't been easy." Emma paused, a tear rolling down her cheek. Her father had been gone for years, but his presence felt so near in this moment. He continued, "I wasn't able to give you much while I was here, burdened by my own limitations and the demands of life. But know this: every day I tried to put a little aside, hoping it would someday help you, when I could not. At the bottom of the letter, scrawled in shaky letters, was a phone number. Call this number," he wrote. "Speak to Mr. Thompson. He knows about the small investments I've made. They're not much, but I hope they can help you somehow." With a deep breath, Emma wiped her eyes and folded the letter back, carefully placing it on the table beside her. Her mind wandered to David and Martha at the hospital, facing their own trials. The bond of family felt stronger than ever, a thread weaving through their separate struggles, pulling them together in spirit, if not in presence. Gathering her resolve, Emma picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello," Emma introduced herself, her voice a mix of nerves and anticipation. There was a brief pause on the line, a heavy, thoughtful sigh. "I've been expecting your call, Emma. Your father told me you'd reach out eventually. He spoke of you often with such pride and hope." Their conversation meandered through the lanes of casual updates, but as the pleasantries waned, a subtle shift overtook Mr. Thompson's demeanor. His voice, previously buoyant with reminiscence, adopted a gravitas that piqued Emma's attention. "Emma, you might be wondering who I am or how I knew your father, Mr. Thompson took a deep breath. "I knew him from a day that could have ended tragically for my family. My son. He nearly drowned in the lake." Emma's hand went to her mouth, her eyes widening with shock. It was a dreadful day, mister. Thompson continued, but your father was there. He saved my boy's life. I offered him anything, ready to repay him, but he was a humble man, your father. He refused any material compensation. I had been in finance all my life, and though your father wouldn't take money, he let me help him manage what little he chose to invest. He paused, ensuring Emma was following along. Your father sent small amounts whenever he could. Over the decades, I've managed those investments. I did my best to ensure they yielded the best returns. Emma listened, each word weaving a new layer of understanding about the man her father was and the legacy he left behind. Did you see the papers in the envelope, mister? Thompson's voice brought her back to the present. Emma nodded, remembering the thick envelope she had yet to fully examine. They're all in your name: stocks, bonds, other investments, mister. Thompson's eyes twinkled with a hint of pride. You might want to call your financial advisor to confirm, but last I checked, you are a millionaire. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she processed the magnitude of Mr. Thompson's words. A mix of gratitude and wonder washed over her as she realized the depth of her father's foresight and Mr. Thompson's loyalty. Thank you, she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. As they continued to talk, Emma felt a profound connection to her past, knit together with the unexpected possibilities of her future, all thanks to two men from different worlds, bound by a moment of crisis and a lifetime of gratitude. The first thing that was on her mind as soon as she knew that she had that money was Lily's treatment. The plan to clean the attic was long forgotten already as she rushed down from the attic and grabbed her keys, not even minding to change her clothes. Her heart raced as she rushed to the hospital, the news burning a hole in her pocket. She couldn't wait to share it with David and Martha. Lily's treatment was no longer a financial burden. Her father had taken care of it from beyond the grave. Emma burst through the hospital doors, her determination palpable. I'm here to help with the treatment costs, she declared without hesitation. Martha and David were sitting in the waiting area. David, looking worn from worry, gave her a weak smile. That's really kind of you, Emma, but you don't have to. Actually, I'm going to cover everything. David's expression shifted to one of confusion, his eyebrows knitting together. Everything, he echoed, clearly puzzled. Emma laughed lightly, the sound echoing slightly in the busy hospital corridor. Yes, everything. Let me explain, she said, her eyes twinkling with excitement. This afternoon, while I was cleaning out the attic, I found something incredible. David, still lost in his own concerns, seemed not to grasp her meaning. He blinked, the stress lines around his eyes deepening. I discovered that I'm a millionaire now, Emma continued, her voice filled with a mixture of amazement and joy at that revelation. David's eyes widened dramatically, a mix of shock and disbelief washing over his face. A millionaire, he stammered, his voice a mixture of doubt and hope. Yes, Emma confirmed, nodding enthusiastically. Thanks to some investments my father made a long time ago, I can afford this. David, I want to help. David's initial skepticism slowly transformed into relief, his body visibly relaxing as the weight of financial worries began to lift. I don't even know what to say, Emma. Thank you, he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Emma reached out, squeezing his hand gently. You don't have to say anything. I'm just glad I can do this for you and your family. As they reached the administrative office, she pushed open the door and strode in, gaining attention from the receptionist. I'm here to settle Lily Johnson's bills, she announced, tapping David, who was still in shock. The receptionist looked up, surprised by their sudden arrival. Ah, yes. Let me just check. She tapped away at her computer, her eyes widening as she saw the amount due. Okay, that's a significant amount. Would you like to pay by card or? Emma cut her off, pulling out her checkbook. I'll write a check. How much do I need to pay? The receptionist's eyes flicked to the amount on the screen. It's $517,000. She didn't hesitate as she wrote the check, wanting to get everything done and over with as long as Lily's life would be saved. As she handed over the check, the receptionist's eyes widened in surprise. Thank you. Thank you so much, Miss Emma. She quickly processed the payment, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Within minutes, the bills were settled, and Lily's treatment was secured. It was then that she could finally relax as tears threatened to fall from her eyes. It's done, she whispered. David enveloped her in a tight hug, not minding where they were. Thank you, Emma, he whispered into her ear, still holding her tight. Thank you for saving Lily's life. As the days passed, Lily's health began to flourish. Her treatment was aggressive but effective, and she slowly started to regain her strength. Her smile returned, bringing everyone relief. Emma visited her every day alongside Sam, watching with joy as Lily's progress blossomed. David was always by her side, and they sat together, holding Lily's hands. Sam was always telling her that he wanted to go see Lily. He would carry all her favorite toys and would sit patiently when she was sleeping. It was only sleep that could remove him from being in the room. One of those days, as Lily slept peacefully, David turned to Emma. "You did this. You saved her life." His eyes told her more than he even said. He had always thanked her since that day and was persistent in paying her back one way or the other. The day Lily was finally free to go home was a celebration day. Martha, David, Sam, Lily and Emma all went to get chicken and chips, which was Lily's favorite. "Thank you, Emma. I never thought I'd be here by this time, smiling this way. I'm always in your debt." Martha smiled, holding Emma's hand as the kids were arguing about football with David. "I was in your debt first, Martha. You took my son and me in like we were your own children." She squeezed her hand, smiling too. As she brought her attention back to everyone, she noticed that David had been staring at her the whole time. Emma gazed into the store window, lost in thought. Her eyes wandered to the diamond ring on her finger, and a soft smile spread across her face. She remembered the day David proposed, the way her heart skipped a beat as he got down on one knee. Their relationship had blossomed quickly, and they found themselves inseparable. They spent countless hours exploring the town, holding hands and laughing together. There was never a time when she felt insecure about his love for her. He was rather the one skeptical, not wanting to make it seem like he wanted her for money, just like her ex-husband. As they stood before the altar, exchanging vows, Emma knew she had found her soulmate. They spent their honeymoon renovating both houses, exploring restaurants, and taking care of 2 children. David wanted otherwise, but she knew it was best that they stayed back for the renovation because it might be too much for Martha. Martha, overjoyed to have grandchildren, was always busy spoiling them rotten. They were always going out with her to her social functions, and she bought them books at every opportunity she got. Emma was more grateful to her father that even in death he still brought ease to her. Sometimes she wondered what would have happened if she never went to the attic that day. One day, Emma stood nervously at the entrance of a bustling restaurant, her eyes scanning for a waiter to lead her to a table. Suddenly, a familiar voice pierced the air, dripping with sarcasm. "Well, well, look who's here." It was Mark, her ex-husband, standing smugly beside a young woman. "Are you our waiter?" Leaderson Mark joked mockingly before letting out a forced laugh. He didn't stop there, though. "Still living in that old shack you got from your dad?" he asked, his tone laced with disdain. Before Emma could respond, her heart pounding in her chest, David emerged from the restroom, his brows knitted together in concern as he took in the scene, his wife looking distressed and a stranger chuckling beside her. Instinctively, David knew this must be Mark. With a protective glare, David stepped up behind Mark and firmly nudged him aside. "Is there a problem here?" he asked Emma, his voice calm yet commanding. Mark, caught off guard by David's size and presence, tried to stand his ground. "You got a problem," he retorted, trying to mask his intimidation. Seeing the unwavering stance of David, Mark's confidence waned. As David extended his arm to Emma, inviting her to leave the awkward encounter, Mark's arrogance dissolved into an uneasy chuckle. He glanced from David back to Emma, realizing the dynamics had shifted. "No problem here," Mark mumbled, stepping back to join the young woman, who looked equally uncomfortable. "That's what I thought," David said. As Emma stood there, watching David handle the situation with Mark, a deep sense of safety enveloped her. Her heart skipped a beat as she gazed at him, feeling her love for him deepen with every passing moment. This feeling wasn't just about the immediate protection he had provided, it was about his continual support and kindness that had consistently fortified their life together. In that bustling restaurant, amidst the clinking of dishes and the murmur of conversations, Emma felt a profound gratitude for everything that had led her to this moment. She silently thanked her father, not just for the tangible legacy he had left her, but for the intangible lessons he had imparted: kindness and love, most importantly toward those who truly deserved it. As she held David's hand, feeling the warmth of his touch, she felt a powerful affirmation of her choices and the journey she had navigated. That evening, amid the soft glow of the restaurant lights, Emma knew she was exactly where she was meant to be: loved, cherished, and deeply protected. Did you enjoy the story? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales, thrilling revenge stories, and gripping betrayals.